Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm Rhonda Williams. I'm the director of the CWRU Social Justice Institute and Alliance here at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm bringing you welcome and greetings this morning. Oh my gosh, I've been working hard all day. I still think it's morning, maybe tomorrow morning. That means I'm ahead of the game. So I'm bringing you greetings and welcome this evening here at Case Western Reserve University. I'm going to stick to my script because Daniel Goldhagen gave us some words earlier and said sometimes my short words turns into long words, and I'm like you. So I'm going to stick to my script here. I don't know, hopefully it won't go off too much. So I want to welcome you this evening on behalf of the CWRU Social Justice Institute and its leadership team. Once again, I'm Rhonda Williams, the founding director of the Social Justice Institute and Alliance here at Case. The Institute's mission is this. It is working towards equal access to opportunity for all people through understanding and addressing the root causes of social injustice and developing innovative solutions. It's a mouthful, but it represents the mouthful, the rigorous work that we have to do to actually begin to really think about how we transform society so that it works for the best of all people. As we acknowledge on our website, like any other community or institution, CWRU has not always been on the right side of social justice issues. Throughout its history, Case Western Reserve has not been immune to gender and racial discrimination or neighborhood tensions. But there are people at the university mindful of this and desirous of change for the better. As one expression of this desire to do better, the university has identified social justice and ethics as one of its 4 strategic academic pillars in its 5-year strategic plan entitled Forward Thinking, which was approved in 2008. The Social Justice Institute emerged out of this context and seeks to achieve its mission, which is working toward equal access to opportunity. You can't repeat this enough. Working toward equal access to opportunity for all people through understanding and addressing the root causes of social injustice and developing innovative solutions. And we do this by trying to do at least 3 things, if not more, but at least 3, by supporting innovative and synergistic research, scholarship, and pedagogy, by building and supporting social justice leaders, and by forging productive relationships across boundaries within the university and into the community. This event is one example of our effort to forge a productive relationship. Facing history in ourselves, like the CWRU Social Justice Institute, takes the matter, the past and present matter of discrimination, of oppression, and equity seriously. And for both entities, education is a critical tool. It is through education and purposeful dialogue that is not devoid necessarily of conflict and tension, that does not shy away from contradiction, nor ignore the dynamic of power, that there exists the potential and a different kind of power, a power in knowledge, a power to inform, and a power to facilitate critical engagement in a way that can be eye-opening, in a way that can be provocative, in a way that can be paradigm-shifting, and even life-altering. Education and the stories and voices conveyed through education have the potential to change hearts and minds, and hopefully the power to better guide our assessments and our actions. So when Mark Swain Fox called me and asked if the Social Justice Institute would consider co-sponsoring this event to encourage this kind of dialogue, a dialogue that tonight will feature Daniel Goldhagen and the film Worse Than War, a film that asks us to think about genocide and the ongoing travesty of losing lives in conflict, to think about the impacts of that on human rights, and more importantly, the sanctity of people's lives and the quality of life in the midst of and the aftermath of war. Well, here we are. I said yes. So let us see where this night takes us. Finally, let me say that I am glad that Michael Scharf agreed to join us, both as a participant on stage and as a co-sponsor through the Frederick K. Cox International Law Center. I look forward to Daniel Goldhagen's presentation and to the dialogue with Michael, and I especially look forward to the Q&A. And with that, again, I say welcome to you all this evening, and invite, joke, some levity. I again welcome you all and invite Mark Swain Fox, the Executive Director of Facing History and Ourselves, Cleveland, to introduce our guest speaker, Daniel Goldhagen, this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, can you hear me? Good evening. It's nice to have you. My name is Mark Swain Fox. I'm the director of the Cleveland office of Facing History and Ourselves, and I first want to thank you all for coming out on this lovely spring evening we have tonight. Before I begin, I just want to say a special thank you to our co-sponsors. First, Dr. Rhonda, thank you for your kind words. Thank you. When we first had an opportunity to bring this event to Cleveland, I reached out to Dr. Williams and asked her to participate, and we're thrilled to partner. We believe so much in the mission of the Institute. We're thrilled to be affiliated with you, so thank you very much. I also want to thank the Frederick K. Cox Law Center, which is directed by Professor Scharf, who I'm going to introduce a little bit later because he's going to be a part of the program, but we've been a long-time admirer of yours and the center, so thank you for co-sponsoring. We really appreciate it. Tonight's program reflects Facing History's commitment as an organization to bring communities together to engage in complex and challenging conversations. Conversations similar to those that Facing History teachers have in their classrooms every day. For those of you who don't know, Facing History is an international professional development organization for middle and high school teachers. We work in schools all over the world, and we have an office here in Cleveland where we work in over 75 different schools locally. We strongly believe that by studying the historical development of the Holocaust and other acts of genocide and collective violence, students can make the essential connection between the past and their own moral decision-making today, and ultimately create an informed and humane world. So, therefore, we were thrilled to develop a partnership with Dr. Daniel Goldhagen around his latest book, Worse Than War: Genocide, Eliminationism, and the Ongoing Assault on Humanity, and its companion documentary. We teamed up with Dr. Goldhagen to help co-write an educator's guide for teachers. And the documentary, which is based on the book, raises important questions, such as, why do killers kill? How do leaders act? What do nations and individuals do as a result? And what can we do to prevent genocide? These are clearly questions for which simple answers do not exist, and Dr. Goldhagen doesn't shy away from these and other equally important and complicated questions. In a Facing History classroom, students are engaged as moral philosophers, and they're encouraged to explore complicated questions. These are some of the very questions we ask our teachers, who then work with our students to develop responses to these questions. In fact, right before this event, we hosted a teacher workshop with over 20 teachers, some of them are here this evening, about how to bring this film and this content into their classrooms. So it's our hope that this book, Worse Than War, the film, and the educator guide will become one of the many powerful learning tools we'll be able to offer Facing History classrooms all over the world, and we're thrilled to share this resource with you tonight. So a brief word about tonight's program. Let me lay it out for you. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Dr. Goldhagen. And for those of you who have been in one of our events before, Facing History's learning experience is about active thinking. It's built on dialogue, sharing one's ideas, and asking important questions, and sometimes challenging questions. So, Dr. Goldhagen will first present an overview of some of his key points in his book through the lens of several short video clips from his documentary. Then, I'll invite Professor Scharf to come to the stage, who will engage Dr. Goldhagen, Hagen, in a series of questions. Then, with the time remaining, you can see we have 2 microphones. We'd love to engage you in the question and answer, too. So, now it's my honor to introduce Dr. Daniel Goldhagen, a scholar and international best-selling author of Hitler's Willing Executioners, Ordinary Germans, and the Holocaust, which was first published in 15 languages and was named by Time as one of the 2 best nonfiction books of 1996. He's also the author of A Moral Reckoning, The Role of the Catholic Church in the Holocaust, and Its Unfulfilled Duty of Repair, which has also received numerous awards and been translated into 8 different languages. Dr. Goldhagen received his BA, MA, and PhD from Harvard University. His doctoral dissertation, on which Hitler's Willing Executioners was based, was awarded the American Political Science Association's Gabriel A. Amen Award for Best Dissertation in Comparative Politics. Until deciding to devote himself full-time to writing and speaking, Dr. Goldhagen was a professor at Harvard University's Government and Social Studies departments. He lives with his wife, Sarah Williams Goldhagen, who is an architecture scholar, and their 2 children outside of the Boston area. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Goldhagen.
Thank you. Enjoy. Thank you, Mark, for having me here, and thank all of you for coming, and thank you, Rhonda, for your stirring and kind introduction. And we share not only perhaps the length of our words, but interest in justice. And some of the issues of justice that I'll bring up may be a little more, even more complicated in certain ways than what Rhonda was talking about, which I think should be pretty non-controversial, though, as we know, it's not. And thank you, Michael, for sponsoring this as well, and in anticipation of our discussion afterwards. I am going to show clips from the film, and just so you know, the choice was either to give you a lecture in which I could really go through everything systematically, or to intersperse my words with the film, and you have maybe a little less systematic and thorough presentation of the issues, though we can discuss them more later, but you will get a different kind of presentation where you'll get to see some of the people who have really quite a lot to tell us and get a flavor for, more of a textured flavor of the horrors, unfortunately, that we need to discuss and to understand. And I want to emphasize that what I will be talking about tonight is a subject about which we need to speak plainly and clearly and speak the truth, because our understanding of genocide is shrouded in untruths, confusions, obfuscations, and misunderstandings. And so when I speak, I will speak very directly and forcefully, and I will not sugarcoat my words, because, as you know, this is not a topic that deserves sugarcoating. So let me just begin right now with the first clip, and then I will pick up from there. So all the people here murdered other people?
Yes, you can't be here if you haven't killed.
Nubwo waba utarishe wagiye mu gitero cyishe, waragiye urica, ujya mu gitero cyica abantu 2-3, ujya mu gitero cyica abantu urugamba utarisha abantu, cyangwa utarakoze bufatanye cyangwa gufatanya buguha gufata no gutera inkunga abandi bantu ngo bice.
Can you show me how the person was hacked?
Wanyereka se nko mu buryo ukuntu umuntu yatemwe.
Abona umuntu wafashe gutya nyine kwirukankana umuntu tema gutya tema kamucoco umucamo ibice, ariko cyane ibintu byakoraga icyo gihe n'impiri wakwita gacocisha umutwe n'iki, ariko umuntu mu buryo uko batema igitoki, ko batema igiti, umuntu aroroshye ariko igiti kirakomeye, ngo tema rimwe ugatema kabiri ugacamo ibice ukagenda.
I've been thinking and writing about genocide for nearly 30 years. It's something people don't much like to talk about, and about which most of us remain dangerously misinformed.
Good evening. A new book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, a highly controversial account of the Holocaust.
The American Daniel Goldhagen says the excuse of only obeying orders won't wash.
A controversial book about the Holocaust, raising a troubling new question. Were Nazi killers helped by hundreds of thousands of ordinary Germans?
They subjected the victims to gratuitous brutality, incessant cruelty. So the picture that emerges is not of reluctant people who are compelled to do what they did, but people who agreed with the program, who believed that the death of the Jews was necessary and just. I've spent my professional life trying to dispel the many myths that cloud people's judgment and prevent us from doing something effective to stop the killing. Genocides happen in every corner of the world, to every type of people. The numbers in the past 100 years are staggering. The Turks slaughtered more than 1 million Armenians during World War I. In the 1930s and 40s, the Japanese killed millions across Asia. In the Soviet Union, the estimated number of deaths in the Gulag camps and beyond is more than 8 million. The Germans slaughtered 6 million Jews and millions more during World War II. In the 1950s and 60s, the Communist Chinese killed an estimated 30 million. And during the 1970s, the Khmer Rouge killed 1.7 million Cambodians, fully 20% of that country's population. Bosnia, Rwanda, Congo, Darfur. All told, in our time, there have been more than 100 million innocent victims of genocide. More than all the combat deaths in all the wars fought during that time everywhere in the world. Based on the human toll alone, genocide and mass slaughter are worse problems plaguing humanity than war. We need to understand why. I start this evening with the opening of the film, and we start the film with the opening of the film because it contains 3 truths: a large-scale truth, medium-scale, and a small-scale truth. The large-scale truth are the numbers that you heard, that more than 100 million people, perhaps many more than 100 million people, have been killed by genocidal executioners during our time that is dating from the beginning of the 20th century, more people than have died during conventional military operations. What this immediately suggests is that genocide should be not treated as a tertiary or a secondary or tertiary problem in international security discussions and international relations, which is what it is treated as, but should be at the center of all international security discussions and international relations. In fact, this fact should be known to every concerned citizen in this country and in the world. And it is unknown to virtually every concerned citizen and everyone in the world. That's how poor our understanding of genocide is. When you learn this, it changes your view of the world. It changes the way the landscape of international politics and the international system looks and what goes on in countries and what the major problems are. We should remember this, and I'll come back to it. In addition to the large-scale truth, we have the medium-scale truth, which is in my person. When I wrote my first book, as you heard there in the clip, there was a lot of pushback. When I wrote a book about the Catholic Church and the Holocaust, there was a lot of pushback. Anyone who has ever dealt with this subject and who is willing to speak forcefully about it, that is the Holocaust and more generally genocide, will upset a lot of people. Some simply don't want to hear about it. Others, who might be sympathetic to what you say, don't want it to be said because they're worried about the consequences. And all those who really don't like what you have to say, and there will be plenty of people who don't want you to say it at all. And they push back, and they don't do so fairly. And as I said, any of you who have done this before I imagine, have come up against this. And so you need to be willing to face some hardship when you want to talk about these issues directly and truthfully. Many people shirk from it. I urge you not to, because the horrors need to be discussed, they need to be taught. That is, we need to understand, we need to teach people how to understand them, and ultimately, all this points to trying to do something to stop them. And then there's a small-scale truth in the person of Eli Nigarambe, the Hutu perpetrator, who tells us or reminds us about the nature of mass slaughter, which has been overwhelmingly a personalized act, a personal act in which a perpetrator faces his victim or her victim, though they've usually been men, and decides to raise his hand and to strike that victim down and then to strike again and again and again in the manner that Eli demonstrated for us and in other ways. We need to remember, we need to realize or remember that these are not abstract deeds done by abstract people against abstract victims, but they're real acts done by individual human beings working in institutions and working together with others who decide a great deal about what to do and how to treat their victims. And so, in thinking about genocide, we have to keep our eye on all the different levels, the large, the medium, and the small scale, and many other medium-level things aside from the problem of disseminating the facts and the truths about genocide. We have to analyze it on its multiple levels and in its complexity, and I will do some of it for you this evening. Now, if I were to give you a comprehensive treatment of genocide, I would have to deal in great depth with a range of subjects: how they begin, why and how they unfold as they do, why do some take one course and another takes another course, why the killers kill, how genocides end and why they do. Again, to tell you how poor our understanding of genocide has been, until I address this as a theme, the literature on genocide, though substantial, had never addressed systematically the question of how and why they end and why they don't end earlier. Clearly a very important question. And ultimately, we want to know what we can do to prevent future killing and to stop it if it should begin. Now, the first truth, in addition to the ones I opened with that we need to tell, is that genocide is not overwhelming to our understanding. It is not beyond our understanding. It is not beyond our control, even though this is often how it's discussed. It's out of this world. What can we do? It's been with humanity forever. You can't stop it. What makes you think you can? And so on and so forth. Like other large-scale social and political phenomena, we can understand it, we can figure out what to do about it, and we can actually act upon our knowledge. It may not be easy to do these things, but in principle we can do them all. And in fact, I don't think it's all that hard. We need to tell the truth about the extent of the problem. Not only are the numbers gargantuan, as I've described, but there's another aspect of the problem that tells you something about its extent. As bad as you think Darfur is, Rwanda was, Bosnia was, Cambodia, the Holocaust, and so on, people tend to think of these genocides as isolated, ad hoc, or one-off events. And they don't think of them as I think they should, which is that they are not isolated, ad hoc events, but that they are systematic features of the world. They are to be seen that way, not only because the numbers are so vast, and you would think, wow, if so many people are being slaughtered, and there's a major problem of violence in the world, maybe there's some systematic cause, but in fact, when you look at the international system, and I'll say more about it, you see how the international system actually helps to produce these genocidal assaults. It has a systemic quality, and it's very important to speak this truth, because when you recognize that it has a systemic quality, you then start thinking about a systemic solution. Instead of waiting until the next one happens and then saying, what should we do? Oh, maybe we'll try this, and so on and so forth, and reinventing the wheel that in fact was never invented in the first place. We need to tell the truth about the perpetrators. And for that, we'll look at the next clip. The plight of Darfur has moved people of conscience around the world and has only intensified my desire to know more. To see the places where the horrors have happened, meet the people who were there, and ask the kinds of questions you have to ask, even though sometimes you may dread hearing the answer. When the genocide began, what happened to you
Genocide itangiye we byakugendekeye bite
and your family?
na famille yawe?
Hari rero papa umbyara bamwishe bamutemaguje imihoro.
She said her dad was killed like he was, chopped, he was cut with the machete.
Na mama nuko baramutemaguye nawe.
And the mom was chopped, the way she's saying it, she was chopped with the machete.
Na musaza wanjye wankurikiraga nawe baramutemaguye.
And the brother was also.
Who killed her family? Were these just local people who lived here?
N'abantu babaga hano hafi basanzwe.
Babaturanyi twari duturanye ari n'inshuti.
She says they were neighbors. More to that, they were even friends to the family.
Tuzi ko byari bimeze kuko nk'uwo wishe papa n'umuntu yari yarahaye nk'ari inshuti ku buryo yavugaga ati muze dumba nkungishirize yo mwese turabaho. Ariko ntago tuzi ahantu byakomotse kugira ngo.
In genocide after genocide, these are the questions that continue to be asked. How do neighbors end up turning against neighbors? Why do the killers kill? Here in Rwanda, more than 800,000 men, women, and children were killed over the course of 3 months. Most were ethnic Tutsi, murdered by members of the Hutu majority, face to face with machetes, clubs, and guns. Hitler's gas chambers did not kill with such deadly efficiency.
Kugira ngo twinjire muri ubwo bwicanyi, ingoma yaravuze kuko mu gitondo ingoma yavugaga twese twavaga mu ngo abasore n'abagabo. Rero twaragendaga abatutsi babaga bahunze bagiye ku misozi miremire.
When people killed the victims, did they try to kill them as painlessly as possible, or did they try to make them suffer?
Ese mu gihe abantu bicaga abatutsi babanzaga kubatoteza, kubababaza cyangwa bahitaga babica?
Byose byaterwaga waramwirukankanaga yagusiga ukamwirukankana cyane ukamugenda wamwicaga bitewe n'uko yakuruhije. Ariko wamufataga ntatere hejuru waramugusha ukigendera. Rimwe n'ubwo asiga utaramunogonoye akanagonorwa n'abandi. Byaterwaga n'uburyo rero wamufashemo, uburyo yirukanse, uburyo yakuruhije ukavuga uti wanduhije reka nanjye nkwice nabi.
I find it hard to understand, and I want to understand how people could approach other people who are begging for their lives and screaming in pain and chop them.
Cyo ni ikibazo gikomeye cyane kugisubiza kuko iyo ujya kugikora ubona nawe ufite umubiri mu by'ukuri
It's a very tough question to answer because they have the same flesh like yours.
Biranababaje cyane nk'umwana iyo yakuririraga ubona ari agahinja gatoya. Nge ntabwo nigeze nica akana, ariko twageze ukigaya ukabona nk'akana gato cyane kakiga guseka karimo karagusekera wahageze ukakica. Gusa ni nk'ikintu cyaje mu mitima igihu kirabudika icuraburindi riraza kuko nk'umuntu kugira ngo aguhagarare imbere nta mbaraga afite uzamura umuhoro cyangwa uzamira imbere umukubite ati mbabarira rwose nguhe n'amafaranga cyangwa mbabarire rwose nyijyanire ujye kuntunga ndi umukobwa mwiza ubyanjye uvuga uti oya ndakwishe. Nyine ki genocide niyo dutekereje tugasubiza amaso inyuma tukabireba natwe biradushobera. Ntabwo rero nabona uko nkigusubiza, ariko igisubizo nabona cya bugufi ni ikintu cy'igihu cy'ikintu cy'icuraburi ntakwita ngo ni ubujiji. Aho ntabwo ari ubujiji ni ubugome twakoranaga n'abandi bagenzi banjye mu Rwanda hirya no hino, yewe n'abari abahunze badutereranye urugamba badushumuye bakigendera.
When you hear people provide explanations for the killer's actions that say they're just bureaucrats doing what bureaucrats do, they're moving to do what they do because of peer pressure, it's just the system. When they treat them as abstractions, think of Eli Nigarambe and what he said. We need to humanize the perpetrators. We need to see them as human beings who have views of what they're doing and make a lot of decisions about how to treat the victims. And as human beings, they make decisions that we would call inhuman, not in a literal sense, but in the metaphorical sense of the word. They make decisions to do things which we consider to be great horrors, indeed evil, if you believe in such a category. So think of Eli and many other perpetrators who tell of the cruelties they inflicted on their victims, and of the victims who tell of the cruelties and the glee and the laughing and the words explaining to the victims by the perpetrators as to why they and their people should be extinguished for all time, and how they don't consider them to be human beings, among the many things perpetrators often say to their victims. So we need to humanize the perpetrators and not be content with these dehumanizing abstractions of them. And one of the things we need to do, and we can talk more about this later, is we need to focus on the cruelty they inflict on their victims. Cruelty in addition to, on top of, beside the simple act of killing itself, which is almost never ordered from above. If you're told to kill someone, whether you believe it's the right thing to do or not, you do not have to beat, brutalize, torture, mock, and degrade the person first. Yet the perpetrators in genocide after genocide do it again and again and again. It tells us a lot about what is moving them. We need not only to humanize the perpetrators, and this may surprise you to hear, but we need also to humanize the victims. Now, it may surprise you to hear this because we all have sympathy for the victims. But nevertheless, we need to look at them and see their individuality and not lose the horror of the death of each person in the vastness of the overwhelming horror of the genocide and in the enormous numbers that you can barely wrap your mind around. The Germans slaughtered 10,000 people in these 2 days in this town. The Hutu killed 800,000 people in 3 months. I mean, how do you even conceptualize or think about what that means? You need to think about those women and the people and the family they lost and the suffering they underwent. Whenever you think about genocide or you hear about killing somewhere, I've sat across from many victims of genocide in countries around the world and listened to their stories, heard them tell of their suffering and their losses, unimaginable losses. And I thought again and again to myself, I cannot imagine suffering for 5 minutes what this person has suffered for days, for weeks, for months, sometimes for years. And the reason it's important to individuate them and think not, oh, they killed 10,000 people here or 800,000 people there, and instead think, no, a perpetrator and perpetrators slaughtered one person, chopped him or her up, and then another and another until they slaughtered 10,000 people that way, or 800,000 people. The reason we need to do it is so when we hear tales, we react to it with the same horror we would react if someone came into your neighborhood and dragged a man or a woman or a family or 5 families out of their houses and hacked them to pieces in the street. Imagine the outcry. Imagine the news coverage. Imagine the demands for the authorities to do something and to make sure it would never happen. And yet when it's done to 10,000 people, we say, isn't that terrible? Something ought to be done. So think of in every instance of each individual of those women in Rwanda and all they lost, of each individual and what that person has suffered and what he or she will never see because he or she won't be alive, and what their families have lost in losing them. We need to tell the truth about what starts it. It's not ethnic conflict, it's not hatreds that spin out of control, it's something else. Genocide is always the decision of one leader or a small group of leaders. These individuals make a choice to initiate the killing, which in every case means they could have also chosen not to. The leader's goals vary depending on the time, place, and circumstances. Pol Pot wanted to radically transform Cambodian society. The Turkish leader Mehmet Talat wanted to secure Turkey's decaying empire. Adolf Hitler wanted to create a vast political empire ruled by the German master race. Colonel Theoneste Bakasora and his fellow Hutu leaders wanted to secure political power in Rwanda for the Hutu. And in the Balkans, Slobodan Milosevic wanted to permanently redraw the political map of the region.
Genocide is always politics. Of course, there are political goals. Those political goals can be reached in different ways. Some people think that exterminating a group would help their goals, so that's why they do it. Slobodan Milosevic thought at that time that he could, because of the overwhelming military power, make some territorial gains in Croatia and Bosnia. So he attacked. The fulfilling of their mission was to make a greater Serbia. In order to make greater Serbia, you had to exterminate people in your way.
Serbia is right there across the Drina River, and lots of Serb-controlled territory in the central part of the country. They wanted to link those two zones, right? But if you had a significant number of Muslims along the eastern or the western banks of that river, you had a kind of barrier between those two Serbian areas. So these people had to be eliminated.
These things are done in cold blood. This is a design, this is a plan, this is a calculation, of course. This is not a reaction to something. This unfortunately, here is a planned genocide, as is any other genocide, because it's not possible to kill a big number of people without prior preparation, mental preparation, intellectual preparation, military preparation.
It's not ethnic conflicts that spin out of control. It's not ancient primordial hatreds that are irrepressible. It's not many of the things that people say that somehow impersonally produce these horrors. These are political decisions made by leaders who set the wheels in motion, mobilize people, channel them, and get them to kill. Great hatreds, no matter how great, may issue in pogroms, riots, episodic violence, but they peter out. They never produce sustained, systematic, regional, let alone nationwide assaults, violent, murderous assaults upon people, unless they are organized by the political authorities. We need to recognize that this is how genocides begin, because what we ultimately want to do is try to figure out how to make these leaders make different decisions. If they don't opt for genocide, which they have never had to do, it is not inevitable. In every case, they could have opted for another way forward. We want to figure out how to make future would-be genocidal leaders make different choices so that we don't have future killing. And it's important to tell the truth that as bad as the problem of genocide is, it is a form of politics, and is a form of politics which can be called, and ought to be called, eliminationism. In fact, eliminationism is the broader, more fundamental problem of which genocide is one manifestation. And eliminationism is what it sounds like. It's a mindset, an orientation, and a set of policies, a form of politics, in which a leader or state a group, the people who support it, it may be a dominant group, it may be a minority group in a country, set out to eliminate other people, other groups of people whom they dislike, or more than dislike, whom they hate, whom they feel threatened by, or who are simply unwanted or are seen as an impediment to political or other goals. When political leaders set out to pursue eliminationist politics, they have a variety of tools at their disposal. They include forced transformations, such as forcing people to change their religion, violent repression, incarceration in camps, prevention of reproduction, expulsion, and large-scale killing. The largest of such killings we typically call genocide. When you see it in these terms, you see how genocide is but an eliminationist tool. And what that suggests is that we should fight not just genocide, but all forms of eliminationist politics. And that genocide is on a continuum with these other forms of eliminationist policy. As little as the international community does about genocide, as little as it is at the center of international security discussions, these other forms of eliminationism and the politics itself is not even on the radar screen of the international community. That's how poor our reaction and our understanding and reaction to this phenomenon is. The other reason to see them as being integrally linked to one another, that is genocide and these other forms of eliminationism, is that in every instance when genocidal politics have been pursued, that is when mass murder has been used as a tool, those who have been perpetrating it have also used some, if not all, of these other eliminationist means simultaneously. The killing is never done in isolation. It's all part of a package, and eliminationist politics. So we have to tell the truth not only about how it starts, a decision, and what it is politics, and what kind of politics it is eliminationism, and also how little the world does, which I've mentioned, not just about genocide, but particularly about eliminationism. As soon as the killing began, many Tutsi, including Emmanuel Guattari, made their way to a technical school, which was being protected by UN peacekeepers.
hahungiye abatutsi ba hano niboye abatutsi bose baba batuye muri aka gace ubwo tukakomereka n'abari hariya tuvugana n'intwari interamwe zikaza kudutera.
As the lives of Emmanuel and the others with him hung in the balance, the U.S. and other foreign governments began to evacuate their citizens from Rwanda.
Umuryango barawufungura batubwira ko wagiye twinjira mu kigo imbere batsa tureba twitamika imbere y'imodokari bararasa tuvamo baragenda baradusize ku manywa y'ihangu baragenda.
And there were so many people who had run to the UN for security, for protection. And they withdrew and left them there to be massacred in cold blood. This is really something that the UN should be able to explain. How do you withdraw people who are supposed to protect people at a time that is so critical, at a time when you see, because the killings had already started.
Twuzura hose hari huzuye abantu bari ahangaha iyo mpageze kenshi na kenshi ndaza n'igihe tuhagaruka icyo mbona na amashuri y'abantu bari bahari amashuri y'abantu bari bahari bari ahangaha turakomezanya benshi barapfa n'amashuri yabo gusa
So we need to tell the truth about what we do, which is nothing or next to nothing. The case of Rwanda is just one of the most shameful, though they're all equally shameful in that we've done nothing, but there were troops on the ground that could have saved an enormous number of people, and it would have been very easy to insert more troops to really put an end to the genocide. It could have been done very easily, and neither did the UN do it, nor did the US, nor did any other country. Let me just say parenthetically that the clips I'm showing you are very Rwanda heavy. There's a lot of material from Rwanda. The film treats a bunch of genocides: Bosnia, the slaughter of Maya in Guatemala, the Holocaust, Cambodia, in equal depth to Rwanda. It just happens that these are the clips that you're seeing. And if you're interested in seeing the whole film, it can be seen streaming on YouTube, the entire film. Just type in Worse Than War to YouTube or at pbs.org. So it's not just enough to tell the truth about what we do, which is nothing, but also about why we do nothing. And the answer is pretty simple. The cynicism of our leaders, their privileging, indeed slavish devotion, which is at least partly cynical, to the doctrine of national interests. It's rarely in our national interest to expend resources to save people across the oceans. But it's not just that, even though it is that. It's also the international community is set up to do nothing, because the international community, with the UN as a central institution of its organization, governs the international state system with the principle of sovereignty. And sovereignty says that states within their borders cannot be interfered with by other states, by other countries, as long as they are working within their borders. What this means is that if a state attacks another country and starts killing its people, third countries can come to the aid of the country being attacked because the sovereignty of that country was abridged by an aggressive state. But if the same state slaughters people in its own country, until now, we have said, we being the international community have said, you are a very bad person for doing that. But that's about all that has been done. And the reason that this is critical, and perhaps we're seeing some change these days in this matter, perhaps, and we can talk about it later, the reason this is critical to know is that the locus of genocide and eliminationist assaults has shifted from where it was in the first part of the 20th century, which was often international, that is, across the borders of countries, by countries conquering other countries and by colonial powers in their imperial domains. It has shifted in the latter part of the 20th century and today to being almost wholly domestic affairs. Eliminationist politics, genocide almost always takes place is almost perpetrated by a state and its supporters against people in that country. So the principle of sovereignty serves as an alibi to do nothing. It's the country sovereign? What can we do? Particularly when the conflict can be characterized as a civil war in which there are killings on both sides, which is typically how the perpetrators will characterize it and how all those who want to do nothing will also characterize it. And so we have to tell the truth about what is wrong. If a Martian, the proverbial Martian or a naive person, looked around the world, she would see the following: a world in which the strong, who generally decry genocide, they don't want people being slaughtered, with all their military, diplomatic, and economic might, look upon weak states, by and large weak states, with weak militaries, few economic means, very vulnerable. They look upon such states slaughtering their citizens, and the naive person, the Martian, would say, how can this be? How can it be that those who oppose this slaughter look upon it and let it happen and do nothing about it? And then we, after recognizing this, we have to tell the truth about what can be done, which is everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything or nearly everything. If I am right that genocide and eliminationism is a form of politics, which is initiated by a leader or a small group of leaders, that is, a decision is taken that doesn't have to be taken the way it has been, or the way it would be if another genocide occurs. And if I'm right that these leaders calculate the costs and benefits of undertaking an eliminationist politics, of slaughtering people, and after all, as crazy as you may think these people are, you shouldn't think of them that way. They may be a little crazed, but they are cold, calculating practitioners of power. You do not become the political leader of a country if you cannot and do not calculate in a cold, clear-eyed way power and its exercise. And they do so by calculating costs and benefits of different courses of action. They may be besotted by hatred, they may be possessed by ideologies, but in the end, they are also calculators of advantage and disadvantage. So if it's politics and leaders decide and they calculate costs and benefits, we know what to do. We respond politically by changing the cost-benefit calculus so that would-be genocidal or eliminationist leaders in the future, when they contemplate slaughtering or eliminating people, they think, you know, the costs are too high, it's not worth it, I better pursue another course of action. Or, even better, you raise the cost so much so that they don't even begin to contemplate it as a course of action. So what do we do? And this is a long and complicated subject in which I will be telegraphic and brief. We need to set up an anti-genocidal system. Right now, there is no such system in the world. As I've told you, the international community is actually an abettor of genocide. It has created an international system which allows genocide and eliminationist politics to happen, and in some ways encourages it. An anti-genocidal system would have three components: a prevention component, and prevention is based upon deterrence. That's what it is. Deterrence is very simple. Deterrence works when you create a cost to a course of action that is sufficiently large so that those contemplating that course of action decide it's not worth it. Our criminal justice system operates fundamentally on a principle of deterrence. Those who think about committing a crime, stealing, many of them, some commit the crime, they think, you know, I don't want to get caught, I don't want to be put in jail, and so they don't do it. That's deterrence. That's how why we have as few wars as we do, or we don't have more than we do, because there is deterrence. Right now, there is no deterrence in the international system to prevent genocide. We need in addition to prevention system, an intervention system, so that if deterrence fails, if prevention fails, we have the means in place to act quickly to stop the killing. And we need a justice system really a system of punishment, so that after the fact, those who commit the horrors will be punished, so that in some semblance justice will be done. And for that, we have the embryo of a system in the International Criminal Court, which is great that it's been established, but it's like having a Supreme Court without the other lower courts below it, and without the police forces to enforce its measures. The court itself is too slow, too partial in its prosecutions. It took 5 years to issue an indictment against al-Bashir, the genocidal leader of Sudan, for his killings in Darfur. 5 years. And has no enforcement capacity. So it's good, it's the beginning, but it's hardly a justice system in itself. Now, we need all three, and there are many measures that can be proposed and that would be effective, but of the three, what we need most of all is a prevention system, because quite obviously, that is what you want to prevent genocide. You want it for several reasons, because once the killings begin, they are hard to stop. The Rubicon has been crossed. It is hard to get genocidal leaders and those serving them to say it's time to stop, because they know they're already liable. They've already committed the crime. In addition to that, by the time you can stop them, even if you act swiftly, enormous numbers of people can be killed. Genocidal perpetrators can kill 10,000 people in a day. It's already an historic catastrophe. And so you need prevention, and obviously punishment comes much too late, even though it is necessary. So there are many things we can do to create a prevention system. We can make it clear that any government that starts slaughtering its people will be bombed, will have their military forces degraded. They need to know this in advance. Most such leaders rely upon their militaries to be in power. No military in a developing country, in particular, wants to be attacked by a first world air force and have their forces destroyed. It is a powerful deterrent. Again, once the killing begins, it's harder to get them to stop, but it's a powerful, powerful deterrent. And we know bombing can work. It doesn't necessarily work in every case, and we'll see what happens in Libya. And there's a lot to be said about Libya. When, after the mass slaughter of 8,000 men by Serbs in Srebrenica, Bosnian Muslims, NATO finally began to bomb seriously, within 3 weeks, Milosevic was at the negotiating table and the genocidal slaughter was over. If they had started in 1992, we would have saved 100,000 people's lives. I asked Haris Salajic, the president of Bosnia and Herzegovina, what would have happened had they begun bombing in 1992. He said, oh, that would have changed everything. It would have never happened. In addition to bombing, we need to target the leaders, raise the cost personally to the leaders and those around them. And we need to do so by putting bounties on their heads. Some of you may shirk at the notion, bounties. How can you talk about such a thing? Keep in mind what we're talking about is we're preventing the mass slaughter of thousands of innocent, tens of thousands of innocent people, including children. You let them know that if they initiate a genocidal assault, a bounty of, say, $25 million will be put on their heads, on the leaders, and bounties, large bounties will be put on the heads of all those serving in the cabinets, in high-level military and police positions, so that even if the leader says, I don't care, I'm going to go forward with it, all those around him on whom he relies for his power will think twice about it. Because how many of them would want to go to sleep knowing that their own bodyguards might turn them in, might kill them, to collect what would be riches to them? Now, there are all kinds of questions about bounties, ethical questions, questions of policy, questions of feasibility. But the first question is, would they be effective? Let's say, for example, the international community declared the leaders of countries that commit genocide to be outlaws. They can be hunted down until they either give themselves up or until they're killed. Would Milosevic, under these circumstances, have ever initiated the slaughter of Bosnians?
I don't think he would. He counted with powerful friends and most of all with the de facto situation on the ground, knowing that the international community is in love with the status quo. We must show that it doesn't pay.
If people knew that at the end of the day, they'll be the losers, they'll never invest in a losing enterprise. It's because genocide, it's a political game, it's a power play, it's wealth, it's everything. So if people involved in knew at the end of the day they would be the losers, they would not play the game. That's for sure.
Tarcísio Karugarama, who, the Justice Minister of Rwanda, who has steeped himself in the problems of genocide as much as any public figure, he's overseen a justice system that has processed 1.2, it's mind-boggling, 1.2 million people suspected of having participated in the genocide, acquitted 300,000 and convicted 900,000. I asked him, he said this in response to my question of whether a bounty program would have prevented the Rwandan genocide, and he began, it's not in the film, by saying, definitely, 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 many times definitely. Now, just because he and Selagic, who knew Milosevic very well, said it would have prevented the genocide doesn't make them right, but their testimony is extremely important. They're men who know what they're talking about, and they don't speak lightly about these subjects. I'll get back to bounties in a moment. Because first, before getting into them a little bit more, we need to talk about the impossibility or futility of stopping genocide. If I'd been before you 100 years ago, if we had all been here 100 years ago, and I'd given a talk about the coming end to imperialism, to war as a principal means by which states, many states in the world, relate to one another, and said that human rights would become respected in many countries around the world, if imperfectly, but respected in many countries around the world, and be such a powerful public norm that even those that violate it pretend that they don't and pay lip service to them. You would have sat here and said, come on, what are you talking about? This is impossible. Imperialism, it is the most powerful countries in the world who are the imperial powers. They live off imperialism. They live off dominating parts of the world, people whom they think are less than human or inferior. It will never come to an end, not in our lifetime, certainly. War, peace was often conceived of as being just the interlude between war, and war was a natural state, or always an ever-present means by which states related to one another. And yet imperialism, except for perhaps locally, has come to an end in the world, certainly on the scale that we had seen it before, and will not return to the world, any world that looks remotely like ours. And war has stopped being a means by which many states, or states in many regions of the world, relate to one another. It's not possible. It's not a possible policy option in many parts of the world. There's still wars. There's still progress to be made. And human rights, I've already said, are respected in many countries and are a powerful public norm around the world. Now, I mention these, and what I presume many of you, maybe all of you, would have said had we been here 100 years ago. Because when people say it's impossible to put an end to genocide, I say, well, look at these. And in fact, I would argue that putting an end to imperialism, changing the status of war, getting human rights to be respected as much as they are, were far more difficult to achieve than putting an end to genocide. For a whole variety of reasons, and they were hard, and much blood was spilled, and much struggle was engaged in order to put an end to them or to change the situation. But they were much harder to solve than the problem of genocide and eliminationism, in part because these achievements have already been made. And putting an end to genocide and eliminationism can easily build upon what we have already achieved. It is, in some sense, but a minor extension of these achievements. Not minor in its effects, but minor as just an incremental step forward in what we have to do. If I'm right, that political leaders make the decision to start genocide, it also means that our political leaders can make the decision to create an anti-genocidal system. The President of the United States, the leaders of the European Union, the President of the United States alone, and a few leaders of the European Union and some other countries can begin to institute some policies and programs to create this anti-genocidal system. And overnight, change the calculus of would-be genocidal leaders. It would be that easy. All it takes is a few moral men and women willing to do it. It's really all it takes. Now we have to tell the truth about what's radical. And I'll end in a moment, or a few moments. I have one more clip. We have to tell the truth about what's radical. Some of you may think, bounties, radical. How can he talk about this? Who will set the bounties? How can you do this kind of thing? Well, two things about that. You should know that the United States already has a bounty program. It's a bounty program for terrorists called Rewards for Justice. And it says that if you kill a few Americans, we will put a bounty on your head, sometimes very large ones. And these bounties have been effective in apprehending or leading to the deaths of quite a number of terrorists, including Saddam Hussein's sons. But if you slaughter 10,000 or 100,000 people in another country, no, we can't talk about bounties because they're not Americans. Why is it right to have a bounty program for terrorists and not for genocidal killers who wreak far greater catastrophes upon the world? This program has been in place for a couple of decades under both Democratic and Republican administrations. As far as I know, there's no large outcry against it, and is currently overseen by Barack Obama and his administration. To extend it to genocidal killers, again, is a small matter. It's not a big leap in policy. It's just the appropriate, even more appropriate application of an existing policy, that is, if you think the policy is appropriate. And there is a silent, at least, consensus in this country that it is. The second thing about bounties or bombing or whatever other proposals I could make, the truth about it is that if you think it's radical, it's not. Because what is radical, and there is nothing more radical, is the status quo, which is genocidal killers slaughter people and we stand by and do nothing. And tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people have died and can die. Nothing is more radical. Bounties is nothing compared to standing by and doing nothing. We are currently pursuing the most radical policy imaginable. And finally, we need to tell the truth about our duty. The key to stopping genocide is to focus on the leaders. The key to getting us to act is to identify with the victims, to think of each one as if he or she were your daughter or son, your sister or brother, your mother or your father. We're going to tee into Carmen. I don't know how to read it. My journey ends with my father at the place where his began. Shortly after the Germans and the Romanian allies entered my father's town, they slaughtered 800 Jews. My father and his family were nearly executed on a dirt road behind their house, somewhere in this neighborhood.
Do you see any tracks?
Yeah, they should be straight ahead. We end here, and the tracks should be right down here. Here they are. Tony, see the tracks?
I don't know. Do you see them?
Yeah, they're right there.
I see. Yeah, that was here. I lived right here. I ran out with my father beyond from there.
Out the other side?
Yes, I remember we ran over a fence, and as we were running, a soldier spied us and beat my father very severely with the butt of his rifle, and put us against, said, wait here, put us against, there was a fence, against the fence. And then he told me to tell the family to come out.
So he sent you back to the house?
He sent me back to the house, and we saw neighbors standing beyond this railway, and we realized that they're looking at us in a certain way, that they, in an ominous way, which didn't bode well, to say the least.
Now that we're here, has this changed your
the
view?
The point is that the scholarly element, the scholar then immediately takes over and overshadows the emotions of the survivor who revisits the scene of his near death. So that as I talk to you, I begin to reflect, draw historical analogies, and so on. So therefore, it has a certain tempering effect upon my emotions as I confront this house where I lived, the street where I walked, and reflected on my blood lying in the dust here. But when I remember that moment as I walked, and I just couldn't believe. Yes, I did reflect upon how I would lie dead. What does it mean to be dead and to lie in your blood? I remembered vividly this imagery that I had as I walked. And
what must it feel like for a 10-year-old boy to contemplate his own imminent, violent death? Or a 16-year-old girl? Or a 19-year-old man? What must it feel like to be imprisoned in a rape camp? Or to watch helplessly as members of your family are killed, or as your people are decimated? What must it have been like for the men of Srebrenica who were herded into this warehouse? Or for the others forced at gunpoint into nearby fields to be executed? We can't stand by anymore. People are dying every day. A few political leaders start genocides. A few political leaders can stop them. The presidents and prime ministers we elect have the power to end impunity and change the choices potential mass killers make. We must hold our leaders accountable and demand that they bring an end to genocide and eliminationism. And finally, we need to tell the truth about our duty. Ask yourselves, each one of you, If you knew that Rwanda were about to begin tomorrow, or something like Rwanda, a mass murder in which hundreds of thousands of people would die, would you say it would be better to have a bounty program in place to prevent it from happening, or to have guaranteed bombing to prevent it from happening? Or would you say, no, I'm too uncomfortable with these kinds of things. Better to do nothing. All diplomatic measures have been exhausted. The leaders won't listen to reason. Better to do nothing and let the people be slaughtered, let the children be butchered. I'm too uncomfortable with bounties. How many of you would say, let the people die? Unfortunately, to stop genocide and eliminationism, you have to be willing to use force. You have to be willing to have a forceful policy and entertain using violence, military means. We need to be grown-ups about this. We can't wish away the problem or pretend that it will go away or that it won't happen again because we talk in the right way to the people who would do the killing. Ask yourselves the question, think about your duty as citizens, get our leaders to act. Thank you.